Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The cold seeped through the thin wool of my shift, a familiar chill that had become the texture of my existence. It clung to the damp air of the market square, heavy with the scent of wet earth, livestock, and the cloying sweetness of despair. A ghost moon hid behind a veil of clouds, offering no comfort, only a bruised purple light that made the shadows deeper and the jeers of the crowd sharper. My wolf, the soul-deep echo that should have been my strength, was a silent, hollow chamber in my heart. They said I was broken, a vessel with no spirit, and in the suffocating silence of my own mind, I believed them. Tonight, my worthlessness would be given a price. The auction block was a crude stage of splintered wood, slick with mud, and the memory of others who had stood here before me. I was the last offering of the night, the final pathetic spectacle for the shifters of the Blackwood pack, whose territory I had been caught crossing. My crime was simple: existence. An unmarked, wolfless omega was a stray, and strays were either put down or sold. "And now," the auctioneer's voice boomed, thick with contemptuous amusement, "we have a special piece. A rare find if you value..." Silence. A wave of cruel laughter rippled through the torchlit crowd. My hands, bound loosely before me with rough rope, trembled. I kept my eyes fixed on a crack in the wooden planks beneath my bare feet, focusing on the sharp agony of a splinter digging into my heel. Pain was an anchor in the swirling sea of shame. "Erindus Merrick," he announced, the name feeling like a curse on his tongue. "Formerly of the Silver Creek pack, I believe, though they have no memory of her." More laughter. He circled me like a vulture, his scent of stale ale and greed making my stomach clench. "She is barren. Her wolf has been silent since her first change, a hollow thing. And best of all, for those of you who value peace and quiet..." He leaned in, his voice a conspiratorial whisper that carried to every ear. "She is mute, has not spoken a word in 10 years. He tapped my cheek with a grimy finger, and I flinched, a tremor running through my entire body. Humiliation was afire, licking at my skin, burning me from the inside out. I was a collection of failures, a list of deficiencies presented for public scorn. "So what am I bid for this empty vessel?" he crowed. "A coin, half a coin for the labor she might provide? She can scrub floors, I suppose, muck out stalls." The bids came in the form of insults. "I'll give you a rusted button for her." "My hounds would eat better." Each word was a stone, and I was drowning beneath their weight. My gaze remained down, my hair a tangled curtain, hiding the flush of shame on my cheeks. This was my end. To be sold for less than a loaf of bread, to live out my days as a slave in some backwater pack. My silence a constant reminder of my brokenness. Then the world changed. It did not happen with a sound, but with the absence of it. The laughter died first, choking in the throats of the mockers. The jeering whispers faded into a tense, prickling silence. The air grew heavy, charged with an energy that tasted of ozone and ancient power. The torches seemed to flicker, their light shrinking back as if in fear. A pressure built, a palpable weight that made me want to drop to my knees. Through the parted crowd he walked. He was a figure carved from the heart of a winter storm. Taller than any shifter I had ever seen, broader in the shoulder, he moved with a predator's deliberate grace. A thick, dark cloak trimmed with black fur fell from his shoulders, and the mud that clung to his heavy boots seemed to dare not dirty the hem. A jagged scar sliced through his left eyebrow and down his cheek, a pale white line against weathered, stoic features. He was not handsome in the way of polished alphas. He was brutal, elemental, a force of nature given form. But it was his eyes that held the world captive. They were the color of steel, glinting in the torchlight with an intelligence so sharp it felt like a physical blow. They swept over the cowering auctioneer, the terrified crowd, and then they landed on me. Everything inside me froze, the pain in my foot, the chill in my bones, the fire of my shame. It all vanished, consumed by the sheer intensity of his gaze. It was a look that stripped away the dirt and the fear, that bypassed the broken omega on the block and saw something deeper, something hidden even from myself. He saw me, King Malric Draven, the Alpha King of the Northern Wastes. His name was a legend, a whispered threat used to frighten pups. They said he commanded legions, that his howl could shatter stone, that he had tamed the wild spirits of the mountains and bent them to his will. What was he doing here, in this grimy border market, at a pathetic auction for strays? The auctioneer was trembling, his face a mask of waxy terror. Your Majesty, he stammered, bowing so low his forehead nearly touched the wood. An unexpected honor. Malric did not acknowledge him. His gaze remained locked on mine. He took another step forward, and the crowd shuffled back as one, a collective gasp of fear and awe. He stopped at the foot of the block, so close I could smell him. His scent was not like the others. It was clean and wild, like pine needles after a frost, the sharp tang of lightning on the air, and the deep, rich smell of cold earth. It was a scent of power, of solitude, of dominance so absolute it had no need for posturing. For a long moment, he just looked at me. His expression was unreadable, his scarred face a mask of granite. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drum in the suffocating silence. I felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in a decade, and it was more terrifying than any mockery. Pali. He reached into a pouch at his belt. The crowd held its breath. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed a single silver coin into the air. It spun, catching the torchlight in a brilliant, mesmerizing arc, before landing on the block with a sharp, definitive clink. It lay there between us, shining against the grimy wood. A single coin. The auctioneer stared at it, his jaw slack. It was the ultimate insult. A price that confirmed my worthlessness to the world. But the way Malric had done it, it wasn't a gesture of dismissal. It was a statement, a declaration. He hadn't bought me because I was cheap. He had paid a single coin because no one in the world would have dared to bid against him. The price was not a measure of my value, but of his power. "She is mine," he said. His voice was a low rumble, a sound that vibrated not in my ears, but in my bones. It was the growl of the earth itself, deep and ancient. One of his guards, a mountain of a man in dark leather, moved forward, a key in his hand to unlock the heavy iron manacle on my ankle. But the king raised a hand, stopping him. "I will do it," Malric said, his eyes never leaving mine. He mounted the 2 steps to the block in a single fluid motion. The space, which had felt so vast and empty, was now consumed by his presence. He knelt before me. The Alpha King, a man before whom armies trembled, knelt in the mud and filth at my feet. A choked sound tried to escape my throat, but my voice was a locked cage. His large, calloused fingers brushed against the skin of my ankle. As he worked the lock, the touch was not rough or possessive. It was careful. A spark, hot and sharp, shot up my leg, a jolt of sensation in a body that had been numb for years. The dormant, hollow space inside me, where my wolf should have been, flickered with a faint, ghostly warmth. It was a phantom limb, aching with a memory of life. The manacle fell away with a clatter. Malric rose to his full, intimidating height. He shrugged off his immense cloak and in one smooth movement, wrapped it around my shoulders. It was impossibly heavy, lined with fur that was softer than anything I had ever touched. and it smelled of him, of wine and winter and absolute power. It swallowed me whole, a shield against the prying eyes and the biting cold. He held out his hand. It was a king's hand, scarred and capable, but his gesture was not a command. It was an invitation, trembling. I stared at his open palm, then up at his face. His steel-gray eyes held a strange light, an intensity that was not pity, but something far more complex. Recognition, possession, destiny. My mind screamed at me to run, to hide, to reject this impossible dream. This was a mistake, a cruel joke, but my body, starved for a single ounce of warmth, of dignity, betrayed me. Slowly I placed my small, trembling hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, engulfing them. His warmth was a fire, sinking into my very bones, chasing away a decade of cold. He led me from the block, down the steps, and through the silent, awestruck crowd. They parted for us like water before a ship's bow, their faces a mixture of terror and disbelief. They saw a king and his strange, broken prize. But as he led me away from the market, into the deep, waiting darkness of the forest, another thought took root in my terrified mind. He held my hand not like a master dragging a slave, but like a man reclaiming something that had been lost. We reached a black, formidable carriage, harnessed to 2 massive horses that stood as still as statues. A guard opened the door, and Malric helped me inside before following, settling on the velvet seat opposite me. The door closed, plunging us into an intimate darkness, the only light a sliver from the slivered moon. The carriage lurched forward, its movements impossibly smooth. The silence inside was heavier than it had been in the square. I was alone with the most feared man in the world, my life now irrevocably his. I huddled deeper into the magnificent cloak, my mind racing. Why? What could he possibly want with a barren mute Omega? I was useless for treaties, for lineage, for anything a king would require. Across the darkness, I felt his gaze on me, as potent as a physical touch. I dared to lift my eyes and met his. The shadows in the carriage played across his scarred face, making him seem even more mythic, more dangerous. His voice, when he finally spoke, was softer than before, a low growl meant only for me. It wrapped around me in the dark, a velvet rope. He did not ask my name. He did not ask about my past. He leaned forward slightly, and his steel eyes seemed to glow. "They called you worthless," he rumbled, the sound vibrating through the floorboards, through my very soul. He lifted his hand not to touch my face, but to gently graze the side of my throat, where a pack mark should have been. His thumb traced the bare, shamed skin. "Fools," he whispered, his gaze burning with an ancient, impossible fire. "They never even looked closely enough to see the starlight in your veins." The words hung in the darkness between us, echoing in the hollow chamber of my chest, where a wolf's soul should be. Starlight in your veins. It was madness, a poet's fancy, spoken by a warrior king who looked as though he had never known a soft word in his life. I shrank back against the velvet squabs of the carriage, the rich fabric a startling contrast to the rough wool of my shift. His cloak, heavy as a shield, was the only thing that kept me from shaking apart. I could feel his gaze on me, a physical weight in the enclosed space, and I did not dare to meet it again. The carriage moved with an unnatural smoothness, the rumble of its wheels a distant thunder. Outside, the world was a blur of moon-drained forest and deep shadow. Inside, there was only the scent of him. Pine, cold stone, and a clean, sharp ozone tang that spoke of immense restrained power. It was a scent that should have terrified me. And it did. But beneath the fear, a strange, traitorous part of me, a part I hadn't known existed, breathed it in like a starving creature, finally finding sustenance. My mind raced, trying to piece together the fractured shards of my reality. The market, the jeers, the single silver coin. And now this mythic alpha who spoke in riddles, and looked at me as if I were a lost constellation. Kings did not buy broken omegas from border markets. They forged alliances, married for power, and sired strong heirs. I was barren, mute, wolfless, the antithesis of a queen. Perhaps he meant to make me a servant, a scullery maid in his great keep. But one did not wrap a scullery maid in a king's cloak and tend to her as if she were made of spun glass. The journey stretched into an eternity of silent tension. He did not speak again, and for that, I was grateful. His silence was a presence in itself, vast and watchful, but his words had felt like sparks landing on dry tinder. I did not know what would happen if I caught fire. At last, the rhythm of the wheels changed, the sound echoing from stone instead of being swallowed by earth. I risked a glance through the window and my breath caught. We were climbing a road carved into the side of a mountain, and ahead, rising against the bruised pre-dawn sky, was his fortress. It was not a castle. It was a wound in the stone, a place of brutal, ancient power, Drevenhold. It rose in sharp, jagged towers of black granite that seemed to tear at the clouds. No flags flew from its battlements, no signs of warmth or welcome. It was a fortress built to endure, not to charm. Sentinel pines, ancient and gnarled, clung to the cliffs around it, their branches heavy with a timeless gloom. As we drew closer, I saw that the main gate was not of wood or iron, but of a solid slab of obsidian, polished to a mirror-like sheen that reflected the ghost moon, making it seem as if we were driving into the heart of the night itself. The gate lifted with a deep, grinding groan that vibrated through my bones. Guards lined the entrance, clad in black leather and steel, their faces grim and unmoving as statues. They did not carry torches. Instead, luminous blue crystals set into the walls cast a cold, ethereal glow over the courtyard. Every guard dropped to one knee as the carriage passed, a silent, disciplined wave of reverence for their king. Their eyes, however, flickered towards the carriage window, towards me, and in their sharp, assessing glances, I saw confusion, suspicion, the beginnings of contempt. The carriage stopped. The door was opened by a guard, whose face was a roadmap of old scars. King Malric descended first, his presence immediately dominating the vast courtyard. The air itself seemed to defer to him. He then turned and offered me his hand. My own hand was slick with nervous sweat. To be seen like this, a waif in a borrowed cloak, emerging from the Alpha King's personal carriage, was to be placed on a stage I never wanted. But to refuse was unthinkable. I placed my hand in his again, and he guided me out. The cold stone of the courtyard floor was a shock against my bare feet. I had lost one of my thin shoes on the auction block. Whispers erupted from the assembled shifters who had gathered to welcome their king. They were subtle, like the rustling of dry leaves, but they were sharp enough to cut. Who is she? An Omega? She has no scent. Look at her, filthy, astray. Malric's hand tightened on mine, not in anger, but in a gesture of steadying reassurance. He ignored the whispers, his steel gaze sweeping over the crowd, and just as it had in the market, the sound died instantly. He led me toward the massive doors of the keep, his stride long and purposeful. I had to nearly run to keep up, my limp from the splinter in my foot becoming more pronounced. He must have felt the falter in my step, for his pace slowed fractionally, his grip a solid anchor in a sea of hostile eyes. We entered the great hall, and I felt as if I had stepped into the heart of the mountain. The ceiling soared into darkness, supported by massive pillars of unadorned granite that were part of the mountain itself. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting the cold light of the crystal sconces like a frozen lake. Banners bearing the sigil of a snarling, three-eyed wolf hung from the walls, their threads dark with age. A fire roared in a hearth large enough to roast an ox, but its heat did not seem to reach the corners of the hall, leaving them in deep, cold shadow. A woman stepped forward from the small congregation of what I assumed was his court. She was tall and severe, her silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a tight, intricate knot. Her face was all sharp angles and aristocratic disdain, and her eyes, the color of winter frost, raked over me with unconcealed revulsion. She wore a gown of dark gray silk that did nothing to soften her edges. Her scent was sharp and clean, like frosted herbs and displeasure. "My king," she said, her voice crisp and cold. "You have returned. We were not aware you would be bringing a guest." The final word was layered with insult. Malric stopped before her, his height casting her in shadow. "Lady Valeriana," he greeted, his tone flat and dismissive. He released my hand and placed it on the small of my back, a gesture of possession so clear it stole the air from my lungs. "The girl is under my protection. See that she is given chambers near my own. Have the healers tend to her, get her cleaned and clothed." His words were commands, leaving no room for argument. Lady Valeriana's lips thinned into a bloodless line. A flicker of fury sparked in her frosty eyes before being quickly suppressed. She gave a stiff, formal bow. "As you command, Your Majesty." She turned to me, her expression now a mask of polite contempt. "Follow me, girl." Malric's hand lingered on my back for a moment longer, a point of burning heat, before he released me. "Go," he murmured, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. "You are safe here, safe." I had never been safe. I did not know the meaning of the word. I followed Lady Valeriana across the echoing hall, keenly aware of every stare boring into my back. I was a wren in a rookery, a fleck of dirt on a polished mirror. Valeriana led me up a winding stone staircase and down a long corridor. She did not speak, and her silence was a weapon, sharp and heavy. Finally, she pushed open a heavy oak door and gestured me inside with a flick of her wrist. "These will be your quarters," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "Far more than you deserve, I'm sure." I stepped inside and froze. The room was larger than the entire hovel my family had cast me out of. A massive bed with a dark velvet canopy stood against one wall, piled high with furs. A fire was already crackling in a stone fireplace, casting a warm, dancing light over the room. A plush rug covered the stone floor, and across the room steam rose from a large, freestanding copper bathtub. Two young serving girls scurried in behind us, their eyes wide and frightened. They carried armfuls of linens, soaps, and folded clothes. "Strip her and bathe her," Valeriana commanded them, her gaze still fixed on me. "Burn the rags she is wearing. The king wishes her presentable." She gave me one last lingering look of pure loathing. "Do not think for a moment that this changes what you are. A gilded cage is still a cage." She turned and swept from the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind her, leaving me alone with the two nervous girls. They wouldn't meet my eyes. One of them gestured timidly towards the tub. My body ached with cold and exhaustion, and the sight of the steaming water was an unbearable temptation. They helped me out of Malric's heavy cloak, folding it with a reverence that bordered on worship. Then they removed my tattered shift. I stood naked and exposed, shivering in the firelight, my skin covered in the grime of the market, my hair a tangled mess. They averted their eyes from the map of faint scars on my back, a history of a life lived on the edges. They helped me into the tub. The heat was a blissful shock, a pleasure so intense it was almost pain. As one girl began to gently wash my hair, and the other scrubbed the grime from my skin with a soft cloth and fragrant soap, the tears I had refused to shed on the auction block finally came. They slipped silently down my cheeks, lost in the water of the bath. It was the first act of gentle touch I had received from a woman in more than a decade, and it was done by strangers, on the order of a king who had bought me. The contradiction was a painful knot in my chest. After the bath, they dried me with warm, fluffy towels and dressed me in a simple but exquisitely soft chemise of fine linen. They led me to the bed, turned down the furs, and motioned for me to get in. I did, sinking into a mattress so soft it felt like a cloud. They curtsied and backed out of the room, leaving me alone in the firelit silence. I lay there, clean for the first time in memory, wrapped in warmth, and felt more lost than ever. This kindness was a language I did not understand. It felt like a trap, a prelude to a cruelty I could not yet imagine. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. The image of Malric's steel-gray eyes, the rumble of his voice, the feel of his hand on mine. It was all seared into my mind. The door opened without a knock. My entire body went rigid. It was him. King Malric stood there, filling the doorway. He had shed his heavy cloak and was dressed in a simple black tunic and trousers that did nothing to disguise the raw power of his form. He closed the door softly behind him, and the room, which had felt so vast, suddenly shrank to the space between us. He walked towards the bed, his movements silent. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. He stopped beside the bed and simply looked down at me, his scarred face unreadable in the flickering light. His gaze dropped to my foot, which was resting atop the furs. The healers did not come, he stated. It was not a question. I could only stare at him, pulling the furs tighter around my neck. He gestured to the edge of the bed. "May I?" The quiet courtesy of the question was more disarming than any command. My throat was tight with a silent scream, but I gave a small, jerky nod. He sat and the mattress dipped significantly under his weight. He was so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Show me your foot," he said, his voice a low rumble. Hesitantly, I extended my leg. He took my foot in his hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip surprisingly gentle as he examined the inflamed, angry red puncture on my heel. "A splinter from the block," he murmured, more to himself than to me. He produced a small, sharp knife from his belt and a clean cloth. "This will sting," he warned. His eyes met mine, and in their depths, I saw not lust or cruelty, but a fierce, unwavering focus. He worked with a surgeon's precision, his large hands steady and sure. The sharp, brief pain was nothing compared to the shocking intimacy of the act. The Alpha King, a man they called the Scourge of the North, was kneeling on the floor beside my bed, tending to my wounded foot like a common healer. When he had removed the shard of wood, he cleaned the wound and wrapped my foot carefully in the cloth. His touch lingered for a second too long, his thumb brushing against the arch of my foot, sending a jolt of lightning straight up my spine. The hollow place inside me, the silent cavern of my wolf, ached with a sudden, sharp pang. He released me and rose to his feet. He stood there for a long moment, watching me, his expression brooding. "Rest," he said finally. "Tomorrow we will talk." He turned to leave. I watched him go, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and a terrifying, burgeoning hope. He was at the door when he paused, his back still to me. "Erindis," he said, and the sound of my name in his deep voice was a physical touch. He turned his head slightly, his profile carved from shadow and firelight. "Do not listen to the whispers in this keep. Valeriana sees a stray. The others see a mystery." He turned fully then, his steel eyes pinning me to the bed. "They are all wrong," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, possessive whisper. "I am the only one who sees you for what you are. Not a stray, not a mystery." He took a step back towards the bed, his shadow falling over me. "You are a lock," he growled, the sound vibrating in the air, "and I have been searching for the key my entire life." I woke to the unfamiliar weight of silence. Not the dead, hollow silence of my own mind, but a deep, resonant quiet that seemed to soak into the very stones of the fortress. The fire had been stoked while I slept, its flames dancing a gentle ballet of light and shadow on the high, vaulted ceiling. For a dizzying moment, I didn't know where I was. My body, nestled in a sea of furs and fine linen, felt alien to me, a vessel scrubbed clean and filled with a warmth it had no right to possess. Then memory returned, a brutal tide. The auction block, the single silver coin, the Alpha King's touch. "You are a lock." I sat up, the furs pooling around my waist. The simple camise I wore was softer than a whisper against my skin. On a chair near the fire, a set of clothes had been laid out. A tunic of deep forest green velvet, soft leather trousers, and supple boots that looked warm and sturdy. A costume. A beautiful lie to disguise the broken thing underneath. Lady Valeriana's words echoed in my mind. A gilded cage is still a cage. My bandaged foot throbbed with a dull, healing ache. The act of him tending to it, so gentle, so focused, was a memory more vivid and dangerous than any of the fear. Kindness from a man like Malric Draven was a language I couldn't comprehend, and I feared its translation more than any threat. A gnawing hunger, sharp and insistent, twisted in my belly. I hadn't eaten in 2 days, but the thought of leaving this room, of facing the cold eyes of the court, was a physical dread. I was a stray he had brought in from the storm, and they were the established pack. They would tear me apart the moment he turned his back. But to stay here was to starve. It was to cower, and I was so tired of cowering. Drawing a deep breath, I swung my legs out of the bed. The stone floor was cold, but not as cold as the fear icing my veins. I dressed in the clothes they'd left. They fit perfectly, as if made for me. The velvet of the tunic was a caress, the leather of the trousers a sturdy embrace. I looked at my reflection in a polished silver mirror on the wall. A stranger stared back at me, a pale, wide-eyed girl with a wild mane of dark hair, swallowed by the clothes of a queen. It was a farce. My hand went to my throat, to the bare patch of skin where a pack mark should be. A brand of shame. No amount of velvet could hide that. Finally, I could ignore the hunger no longer. I took one last look at the room, my cage, my sanctuary, and opened the heavy door. The corridor was empty, the crystal sconces casting their cold blue light on the dark stone. The silence was unnerving. I followed the hallway, my new boots making no sound, my senses straining for any sign of life. The low murmur of voices and the distant clatter of cutlery grew louder as I approached the top of the main staircase. The scent of roasted meat, baked bread, and strong, bitter herbs drifted up to meet me. My stomach clenched painfully. Peering over the stone balustrade, I saw the great hall below. It was filled with shifters, dozens of them seated at long wooden tables, breaking their morning fast. They were a formidable sight. Large, powerful men and women, clad in leather and dark wool, their movements sharp and predatory, even in repose. Their laughter was deep and guttural, their conversations punctuated by low growls of emphasis. At the head of the hall, on a raised dais, sat a smaller group. Lady Valeriana was there, a pillar of icy disdain. Beside her were other alphas, their scents sharp with dominance and arrogance. The king's seat, a massive throne-like chair carved from the mountain's own granite, was empty. My heart sank. He wasn't there. I would have to face them alone. For a moment, I considered retreating, running back to the safety of my room. But the hunger was a physical pain now, and the thought of Valeriana knowing she had intimidated me was worse. Squaring my shoulders, I began my descent. The change was instantaneous. One of the shifters at a lower table spotted me, his head snapping up. He nudged his neighbor. The whispers spread like wildfire. Conversations faltered. Laughter died. One by one, heads turned, and 100 pairs of hostile, curious eyes fixed on me. The great hall, which had been filled with boisterous life, fell into a heavy, echoing silence. The only sound was the crackling of the great fire and the soft, terrified pad of my own footsteps on the stone stairs. Every step was an agony. I felt their gazes like claws, stripping me bare, assessing my worth, and finding me wanting. I could smell their thoughts. Contempt from the women, a crude, dismissive curiosity from the men. They saw the fine clothes, but they smelled the truth. I was nothing. A scentless, wolfless stray, an omega with no place, no pack, no purpose. I reached the bottom of the stairs and stood frozen, a lost animal caught in the glare of the pack's collective stare. Where was I supposed to go? What was I supposed to do? Lady Valeriana rose from her seat on the dais, her movements as elegant and deadly as a striking viper. She glided towards me, a faint, cruel smile playing on her lips. A few of her companions, 2 sharp-faced women with identical sneers, followed in her wake. "Well, well," Valeriana said, her voice carrying through the silent hall. "The stray has emerged from her burrow." She circled me slowly, her frosty eyes taking in every detail of my appearance. "The king's charity is truly a thing to behold. He dresses a gutter rat in velvet and expects us to see a princess." A low ripple of amusement went through the crowd. My cheeks burned with shame. I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, on the intricate patterns of the polished obsidian, wishing it would swallow me whole. "Tell me, girl," she purred, stopping directly in front of me, forcing me to meet her gaze. "What is it you do? You cannot fight. You cannot offer counsel. You cannot bear strong pups for the pack." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow even more public. "You have no wolf. You have no voice. What possible use could the king have for such an empty, broken thing?" Her words were stones, each one finding its mark. My breath hitched, a silent sob trapped in my throat. I wanted to shrink, to disappear, to become as invisible as I felt. Perhaps one of her companions chimed in, her voice shrill. He merely wanted a pet, something quiet to sit at his feet. "A pet should at least be house-trained," Valeriana countered smoothly. She snapped her fingers, and a servant hurried forward with a piece of bread and a wooden bowl of thin stew, the kind of meal given to prisoners or the lowest of servants. She held it out to me. "Here, take this and eat in the kitchens where you belong. Your presence sours the air in the hall." It was a test, a public humiliation. To accept the bowl would be to accept my place as less than nothing. To refuse. I didn't know what refusing would mean. My hand trembled, caught between the gnawing hunger in my gut and the burning shame in my soul. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. "She hesitates," Valeriana said with a laugh. "Perhaps she thinks she deserves a place at the high table." The doors to the great hall boomed open, slamming against the stone walls with a deafening crash. Silence, absolute and immediate, fell like a guillotine. King Malric stood there, framed in the doorway, a living storm. He wore no crown, no finery, just the same simple black tunic and trousers from the night before. Yet his presence dwarfed every other alpha in the room. His steel-gray eyes, cold as a winter dawn, swept across the scene. They took in the petrified crowd, the sneering Lady Valeriana, the servant holding the wretched bowl of stew, and finally they landed on me. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. A flicker of something dark and ancient passed through his eyes as he looked at me, standing there, surrounded and shamed. It was a fury so profound, so elemental, it seemed to suck the warmth from the air. He moved. He did not walk. He flowed, a predator closing the distance with a silent, lethal grace. The crowd parted before him, shifters scrambling to get out of his way, bowing their heads, not daring to meet his gaze. He stopped before Valeriana. He didn't speak to her. He didn't even look at her. His attention was entirely on me. "Erindis," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut through the tension. He held out his hand. My name. He had spoken my name before them all. It was an acknowledgement, a claiming. Trembling, I looked from his outstretched hand to Valeriana's face. The cruel smile was gone, replaced by a mask of taut fury and a sliver of fear. I took a hesitant step forward and placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, strong and warm. A lifeline in a freezing sea. He pulled me gently to his side, tucking me into the circle of his presence, as if shielding me with his own body. Only then did he turn his gaze upon Lady Valeriana. "You forget yourself, my lady," he growled, the words laced with ice. "You are in the presence of my guest." Valeriana's face paled, but she held her ground, her pride a brittle shield. "Your Majesty, I was merely attempting to find the creature her proper place." "Her proper place," Malric interrupted, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, "is beside me." He turned, still holding my hand, and led me towards the dais. The entire hall watched, breathless. He did not lead me to a lesser seat. He walked to the head of the table, to the empty granite throne, and pulled out the heavy chair directly to its right. A seat of honor, a seat that had been empty for years. He seated me there himself, pushing the chair in with a quiet scrape that echoed like thunder in the silent hall. He then took his own seat, his throne. He leaned back, the very picture of calm, lethal authority, and surveyed the room. "Continue," he commanded. Slowly, nervously, the sounds of the hall resumed, but they were subdued, tense. No one looked at the dais, but I felt their awareness of me like a constant pressure. I sat stiffly in the grand chair, my hands clenched in my lap, my stomach a knot of terror and a wild, unfamiliar elation. A servant, trembling, rushed forward to set a place for me, laying out a silver platter, a goblet, and cutlery. Malric took a piece of freshly baked bread from his own plate, broke it in half, and placed a piece on mine. He speared a thick slice of roasted boar and moved it from his platter to my own. The gestures were simple, mundane, but in the rigid hierarchy of a shifter pack, they were a declaration. He was providing for me from his own plate. He was claiming me as his, under his protection, in front of them all. Valeriana watched from her seat down the table, her eyes burning with a hatred so venomous it was almost a physical force. I ate, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the fork. The food tasted like ash in my mouth, but I forced it down, knowing his protection depended on my acceptance of his favor. He ate in silence, his presence a solid wall between me and the rest of the world. When the meal was over, he rose. "Walk with me," he said, his voice quiet, but leaving no room for refusal. I followed him from the hall, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back. He led me not into the fortress, but outside, through a small side door that opened onto a secluded garden. It was a wild place, carved into the mountainside, where resilient mosses clung to black stone and hardy purple-flowered mountain herbs grew between the cracks. A small steaming spring bubbled up into a stone pool at its center. He led me to a stone bench overlooking the vast, snow-dusted expanse of the northern wastes. We sat in silence for a long time, the cold, clean air a balm after the stifling tension of the hall. "You must not let them see your fear," he said finally, his voice a low murmur against the sigh of the wind. "They are wolves. They will mistake it for weakness, and they will tear you apart." I looked at him, at his scarred profile against the endless sky. 1,000 silent questions screamed inside me. Why are you doing this? What do you want from me? As if he could hear the thoughts I could not speak, he turned to face me. His steel eyes were intense, searching. "I told you that you are a lock, Arendis, and I am the key. But a lock that has been rusted shut for a decade does not open easily." He paused, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "What they did to you, your old pack. They did not just silence your voice. They tried to extinguish your soul." My breath caught. He saw. He saw the depth of the wound, the true nature of my brokenness. "I will not let that happen," he continued, his voice resonating with an oath. "Whatever spark they tried to smother, I will fan it back into a flame." He reached out, his gloved fingers gently tucking a stray strand of my hair behind my ear. The touch was feather-light, yet it sent a tremor through my entire being. It was a gesture of impossible tenderness from a man made of granite and winter. For the first time in 10 years, a fragile, terrifying tendril of hope began to unfurl in my chest. Perhaps this wasn't a cage after all. And then I smelled it. Lady Valeriana was approaching from the arched doorway of the garden. As she drew nearer, her scent of frosted herbs and cold fury washed over me. But tangled within it, clinging to her like a second skin, was another scent, faint but unmistakable. It was the intimate, personal scent of the Alpha King himself, pine and lightning and cold, deep earth. It wasn't the scent of proximity, of someone who had simply been in the same room. It was deeper, a scent that lingered on shared pillows, on tangled sheets. The scent of a lover. My blood ran cold. The fragile tendril of hope withered and died, turning to ash in my chest. Valeriana stopped a respectful distance away, a triumphant, knowing smirk touching her lips as she saw me register the scent. Her frosty eyes met mine over the king's shoulder, and in them I saw the truth. I looked from her victorious gaze to Malric's face. He was still looking at me, his expression earnest, his words about fanning my spark still hanging in the air between us. It was all a lie, a game. This kindness, this protection, this strange, intense focus, it was a performance. I wasn't a lock he wanted to open. I was a new, interesting toy. A pawn to be used in some cruel game against his consort, his lover, the woman who wore his scent like a brand. The gilded cage wasn't the room. It was the hope he had just given me, and its bars were forged from the most devastating betrayal of all. The world narrowed to a single sharp point of pain. The scent, pine and frost clinging together in a lover's embrace, was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs and shattering the fragile hope that had begun to bloom in the frozen wasteland of my heart. Betrayal was a bitter, familiar taste, but this was a new vintage, more potent and devastating than any I had known. He had spoken of my soul while wearing the scent of another. He had promised to fan my spark, while the embers of his passion for her still clung to him. My gaze flickered from Lady Valeriana's triumphant smirk to the king's face. He was watching me, his brow furrowed in concern at the sudden shift in my expression. He saw my retreat, the way I physically recoiled, pulling the shattered pieces of myself back into the shell of my silence. He just didn't understand the cause, or perhaps he did, and this was all part of the cruel theater. "Your Majesty," Valeriana said, her voice a silken weapon, "forgive the intrusion. The emissaries from the Stonefang pack have arrived. They await you in the throne room." Malric's jaw tightened. He did not take his eyes off me. It was as if he were trying to read the silent scream behind my eyes, to decipher the sudden, complete shutdown of my spirit. "I will be there shortly," he said, his tone clipped. "They are impatient," she pressed, a subtle challenge in her words. She was reminding him of his duty, of the world that existed beyond this strange fascination with me. She was reasserting her place. He finally turned his gaze on her, and the temperature in the garden dropped by 10 degrees. "I said, I will be there shortly," he repeated, each word a block of ice. The sheer, unrestrained power in his voice made Valeriana take an involuntary step back, her mask of composure cracking for a fraction of a second. She bowed her head in submission. "Of course, my king." She turned and swept from the garden, but not before casting one last venomous look at me over her shoulder. It was a look that said, "He may play with you, stray, but he comes home to me." When she was gone, the silence she left behind was heavy with unspoken things. Malric turned back to me, his expression a thunderous mask of frustration. He reached for my hand, but I flinched away, tucking my hands into my lap. The memory of his touch, which moments ago had been a source of impossible warmth, was now a brand of deceit. His hand stopped in midair. A flicker of something that looked like hurt crossed his face before it was replaced by granite stillness. "Erindis," he said, his voice low and strained. "What is it? What did you see?" I shook my head, my eyes fixed on a crack in the stone bench. I could not look at him. If I looked at him, he would see how completely he had just broken a thing that was already in pieces. I wrapped my arms around myself, a futile attempt to hold myself together. The scent of him, of her, was all around me, suffocating me. "It is Valeriana," he growled, the conclusion a soft, dangerous rumble. "What did she say to you in the hall?" I remained silent, a statue of misery. It wasn't what she had said. It was what she smelled of. It was the truth she wore like a perfume. "Damn it, look at me," he commanded, the frustration in his voice escalating. When I didn't respond, he let out a harsh, controlled breath. He stood and paced the small garden, a caged lion, his power a palpable, crackling energy in the confined space. "I cannot help you if you will not let me in. I cannot fight shadows." But he was the shadow, This entire situation was a web of deceit, and I was the fly caught in its center. He thought I was a lock, but I was just a decoy, a distraction. He stopped in front of me and crouched down, forcing me to either look at the ground or at him. Reluctantly, my gaze lifted. His face was inches from mine, his steel eyes burning with an intensity that was almost frightening. "I do not share my bed with her," he stated, his voice a low, fierce whisper. "Not for years. Whatever you think you know, whatever you think you smell, you are wrong." His words were a direct assault on my senses. On the one truth a shifter cannot deny: scent does not lie. The intimacy of it, the way it had woven into the very fabric of her being, was not the mark of a passing encounter. It was the scent of a shared den, of a long-standing claim. My disbelief must have been plain on my face, because a muscle feathered in his jaw. "Things in this keep are not always as they seem," he said, his voice tight. "There are layers of politics and history you do not understand. Valeriana's family is old and powerful. Her position at court is complicated. Complicated. It was a courtier's word, a politician's word. It was a word used to hide the simple, ugly truth. He was bound to her in one way or another, and he was using me as a pawn in their private war. The kindness, the protection, it was all a calculated move on a game board. I was not even allowed to see. He saw the wall of my disbelief, and his frustration hardened into a grim resolve. He rose to his full height, looming over me. "The Stonefang emissaries are a pack of vipers. They will be looking for any sign of weakness in my court, in my attachments." His eyes held mine. "I need you by my side. I need you to stand there, in silence, and show them that you are not afraid. Show them that you belong to me, and that this pack is whole and strong." It was a command dressed as a request. He wasn't asking me to trust him. He was telling me to perform a role. The prized pet, paraded for his rivals, my stomach turned to ice. He offered his hand again. This time I did not refuse. To do so would be an act of defiance he could not afford, and I could not survive. My fingers were cold and lifeless as he enclosed them in his warm grip. He pulled me to my feet, his gaze searching my face one last time. "Just stand with me, Arindis," he murmured, a plea hidden beneath the growl of command. "That is all I ask for now." He led me from the garden, his grip on my hand unyielding. We walked through the cold, echoing corridors towards the throne room. Guards in black steel snapped to attention as we passed, their faces impassive. With every step, I felt more like a prisoner being led to her own execution. The doors to the throne room were massive slabs of iron-banded oak. 2 guards pushed them open, and the scene within was revealed. The room was even larger and more intimidating than the Great Hall. The king's throne, the same one from the hall, sat on a high black stone dais. The walls were hung with ancient battle-worn tapestries depicting the history of his line, a brutal chronicle of conquest and bloodshed. The room was filled with the tense, hostile energy of a standoff. On one side stood Lady Valeriana and the Dravenhold court. On the other stood 3 shifters, who were clearly the Stonefang emissaries. The alpha leading them was a brute of a man, his face a landscape of scars, and his nose twice broken. His scent was of blood and iron, and a deep simmering aggression. His 2 companions were leaner, more like wolves, their eyes constantly moving, assessing every shadow for threats. All conversation ceased the moment we entered. Every eye locked onto Malric, and then onto me, his hand still holding mine. I could feel the shock ripple through the room. The Stonefang Alpha's eyes narrowed, a predatory glint in their depths as he took in my simple tunic, my lack of a pack mark, my obvious Omega status. I felt naked, exposed, a soft-bellied creature laid bare before a pack of wolves. Malric led me to the dais. He did not release my hand. He walked up the steps and stood before his throne, pulling me with him so that I stood beside it, slightly behind him, a position of unmistakable favor and protection. Only then did he let go, the heat of his touch lingering on my cold skin. "Alpha Kale," Malric said, his voice booming with authority, resonating from the very stones of the room. "You have come a long way. I trust your journey was uneventful." Alpha Kale gave a tight, humorless smile. "As uneventful as any journey through the northern wastes can be, King Malric. The territory is restless." His gaze flickered to me again, lingering for a fraction too long. "And it seems you have found new ways to occupy your time." The insult was clear, wrapped in the thin veneer of diplomacy. He was calling me a distraction, a weakness. I felt a low growl rumble in Malric's chest, a vibration I felt through the stone floor. "I have found what was lost to me," he replied, his voice dangerously smooth. "My concerns are my own." "Of course," Kyle sneered, unabashed. "But when the king of the north takes a stray to his side, it becomes the concern of all his neighbors. Stability, you understand. A pack is only as strong as its Luna." Luna? The word struck me like a physical blow. It was absurd, impossible. I was a barren, wolfless Omega. The idea of me being a Luna, a pack's heart mother, was a grotesque joke. I saw Valeriana stiffen from the corner of my eye, her knuckles white where she gripped the folds of her dress. "You overstep, Kale," Malric warned, the calm in his voice more terrifying than any shout. "Do I?" Kyle took a step forward, his aggression rolling off him in waves. "I see a nameless, scentless Omega at your side. I see no pack mark on her throat. Tell me, King Malric, what pack would cast out such a treasure? Or did you simply find her wandering, half-starved, and decide she would make a pretty ornament for your throne?" My hands trembled. The humiliation was a fire licking up my spine. He was voicing every fear, every insecurity I possessed, and laying them bare for everyone to see. I wanted to run, to hide, to vanish into the stone. Then Malric moved. It was a subtle shift, a mere lean forward, but it changed the entire dynamic of the room. The air crackled with his power. "The Silver Creek pack cast her out," he said, his voice soft, almost conversational, yet it carried to every corner of the room, for the crime of being more than they could understand. He turned his head slightly, his steel gaze finding me, and in that look, I saw something that defied all logic, all reason. It was not pity. It was not political maneuvering. It was a raw, fierce belief that stunned me to my core. "They saw a flaw," he continued, his eyes still locked on mine while his words flayed Alpha Kale. "I see a strength they were too blind to recognize. They threw away a diamond because they thought it was a common stone. Their loss is my gain." He then turned his full, chilling attention back to Kale. "And she is no ornament. She is the heart of this mountain, and you will show her the respect you would show me." A collective gasp went through the room. It was an impossible declaration, a mad king's decree. He was not just claiming me. He was elevating me, placing me at the very center of his world, of his power. Alpha Kale was momentarily stunned into silence, his jaw working. He had come here to provoke, to find a weakness, and instead, he had been met with a declaration of war over a broken Omega. It was in that moment, standing beside the granite throne, that I felt a flicker, deep inside me, in the silent, hollow cavern. Where my wolf had slept for a decade, something stirred. It was not a howl. It was not a growl. It was a tiny, fragile spark of heat, a ghost of a pulse in a long dead heart. It was a response to his belief, a resonance with the raw power of his conviction. Kyle recovered, his face twisting into a contemptuous sneer. "Brave words, Draven, but a heart can be broken. A diamond can be shattered." He took another step, his hand moving towards the hilt of the dagger at his belt. It was a blatant challenge. Malric didn't even glance at the weapon. His eyes narrowed, and a low primal growl started deep in his throat. It was not a human sound. It was the sound of shifting rock, of an impending avalanche. The crystal sconces on the walls flickered, their light dimming. A tremor ran through the stone floor, a deep, resonant vibration that came from the mountain itself, as if it were responding to its master's rage. "Try me," Malric whispered, and the words were not a threat. They were a promise of absolute annihilation. The power Malric unleashed was not the wild, snapping rage of a lesser alpha. It was a physical pressure, a force of gravity that bent the will of everyone in the throne room. The air grew thick and heavy, tasting of ozone and cold stone. The tremor beneath my feet intensified, a deep primal groan from the heart of the mountain. Alpha Kale froze, his hand hovering over his dagger, his brutish confidence draining from his face, to be replaced by a primal, instinctive fear. He was a wolf who had just realized he had cornered not another predator, but a force of nature. Malric didn't move a muscle. He simply stood there, a conduit for the ancient power of his domain, his steel eyes promising a death so complete it would erase Kael's name from memory. The Stonefang emissaries behind Kael shuffled nervously, their own wolves whining in their minds, begging them to submit, to flee. The Dravenhold court stood rigid, their expressions a mixture of awe and terror. This was their king, the true king, the one whose legends were whispered in hushed, frightened tones. Kael, to his credit, held his ground for a long, agonizing moment, his pride warring with his survival instinct. The pressure in the room became unbearable. My own bones ached with it. The tiny, nascent spark inside me flickered wildly, drawn to the immense power radiating from Malric, like a moth to a cataclysmic flame. Finally, with a visible, shuddering effort, Kael lowered his hand from his dagger. He took a half-step back, a subtle but undeniable gesture of submission. He dipped his head, not in a full bow, but in a grudging nod of acknowledgement. "My apologies, King Malric," he ground out, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "No offense was intended to your chosen." The pressure in the room receded, vanishing as quickly as it had come. The mountain fell silent. The crystals on the wall returned to their steady, cold glow. Malric gave a slight dismissive nod, accepting the surrender. The confrontation was over. He had won, not with claws or fangs, but with the sheer, unassailable weight of his will. "You came to discuss the encroachment of the feral wargs on our shared border," Malric stated, his voice now calm and measured, as if the suffocating display of power had never happened. "Let us discuss it." For the next hour, I stood by his throne, a silent effigy. They talked of territory, of hunting grounds, of the feral packs that were a plague on all shifters. Kael and his men were subdued, their earlier aggression replaced by a wary, resentful caution. They directed their words to Malric, but their eyes kept flicking to me, trying to understand, trying to find the source of the king's mad devotion. I kept my expression blank, my gaze fixed on a distant tapestry, channeling a stillness I did not feel. In that, storm was raging, the heart of this mountain. His words echoed in my mind, a chaotic, terrifying refrain. He had not just defended me, he had defined me. He had tied my identity to the very stone beneath our feet. It was a burden too heavy to comprehend, a title I could never possibly deserve. And yet, the memory of that flicker, that ghost pulse inside me when he had spoken, was undeniable. Something within me had answered his call. When the meeting concluded, the Stonefang emissaries were escorted from the throne room by Malric's guards. They left with stiff backs and simmering resentment. We were not done with them. A challenge like that, so publicly rebuffed, would fester. As the great doors closed, a collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the Dravenhold court. Lady Valeriana approached the dais, her face a pale, tight mask of fury. "Majesty," she said, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. "What have you done? To declare her the heart of this mountain, you have made us a laughingstock. You have shown our enemies a weakness they will not hesitate to exploit." Malric turned his cold gaze upon her. What they saw was not weakness, Valeriana. They saw a conviction so absolute it terrified them. They came here to test my resolve, and they found it forged in granite. They saw a wolfless mute Omega you've elevated beyond all reason, she shot back, her composure finally shattering. She is nothing, a stray you bought for a single coin. She is not fit to be your pet, let alone... She couldn't bring herself to say the word Luna. That is enough. Malric's voice was a flat, lethal command. He took my hand again, his touch a possessive brand. My decision is made. Erindis is under my protection. She is part of this pack, and she will be afforded the respect due to her position. If anyone in this court has an issue with that. His gaze swept over the assembled shifters, a silent dare. They can leave. The northern wastes are vast. I'm sure you'll find a home elsewhere. It was the ultimate threat. Banishment. To be cast out from the strongest pack in the north was a death sentence. A stunned silence fell over the court. No one moved. No one spoke. The message was clear. I was his. To challenge me was to challenge him, and no one was foolish enough to do that. He turned and led me from the throne room, leaving Valeriana standing there, her face a mask of pure, murderous hatred. He did not take me back to my chambers. Instead, he led me down a winding set of stairs I hadn't seen before, deeper and deeper into the heart of the mountain. The air grew cooler, and the scent of damp earth and ancient stone intensified. The crystal sconces gave way to flickering torches set in iron brackets, casting long, dancing shadows. We came to a heavy, iron-bound door. Malric produced a large, archaic key and unlocked it. He pushed it open, revealing a vast circular chamber. My breath caught in my throat. It was a library, but unlike any I could have imagined. Shelves carved directly into the stone walls rose from the floor to the domed ceiling high above, filled with thousands of leather-bound books and ancient rolled scrolls. A massive ornate map of the known world was etched into the polished obsidian floor, its continents and oceans inlaid with veins of silver and gold. In the center of the room, a beam of what looked like pure moonlight lanced down from an unseen source in the ceiling, illuminating a single stone pedestal. "This is the heart of the mountain," Malric said softly, his voice echoing in the hallowed space. "The chamber of echoes, the history of my line, the lore of our people, the secrets of the earth itself. It is all recorded here." He led me towards the central pedestal. As we grew closer, I could see that the beam of light was not moonlight. It was a soft internal luminescence, emanating from the stone itself. On the pedestal rested a single ancient book, its cover made of what looked like petrified wood, bound in dark, unmarked leather. "Every Alpha King of Drevenhold has a unique connection to this place," he explained, his eyes fixed on the book. "A resonance with the mountain. My father could hear the whispers of the stone. My grandfather could feel the shift of the seasons in his bones. For me..." He paused, turning to face me, his expression more open and vulnerable than I had ever seen it. "For me, it has always been a silence, a void. The mountain is here, its power is here, but it does not speak to me. It is a lock without a key." He gestured to the book. "This is the Alpha's grimoire. It is said that it can only be opened by the Alpha King and his true mate, their hands placed upon it together. When opened, it reveals the destiny of the pack. It has not been opened in 3 generations. I stared at him, my mind reeling. The implications of what he was saying were staggering. True mate. The words were a myth, a fairy tale whispered to pups, a bond of the soul, a perfect match forged by destiny itself. It was a bond no one in living memory had ever found. "I have brought every highborn female, every powerful Alpha's daughter, every candidate for Luna to this chamber," he said, his voice raw with the memory of a lifetime of disappointment. "I have placed my hand on this book with theirs. Valeriana, her family has been desperate for the alliance for years. We tried. Nothing." His eyes bored into mine. The book remained sealed. The mountain remained silent. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "And then I saw you, in that filthy market, standing on a block, being sold for less than nothing, and when I looked at you, I didn't see a broken Omega. For the first time in my life, I heard a sound in the silence, a faint echo, a note of a song I had waited my entire life to hear. He slowly, reverently placed his right hand on the cover of the ancient grimoire. The book remained dark, inert. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, terrifying hope. "Erindis," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Please." My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. This was madness, a desperate king chasing a ghost, a fantasy. I was barren, wolfless, mute. I was the antithesis of a fated mate. If he did this, if we tried and it failed, the hope that was kindling in his eyes would die, and he would have no more use for me. The truth of my worthlessness would be laid bare. But how could I refuse? After he had defended me, declared me, elevated me, to refuse would be a betrayal he would never forgive. My hand trembled as I lifted it. It felt impossibly small and frail as I moved it towards the book, towards his large, scarred hand. The air in the chamber crackled with anticipation. The silence was absolute, a held breath. I hesitated, my fingers hovering an inch above the ancient cover. I was afraid of the failure. But even more, I was afraid of the possibility. What if he was right? What would that mean for a broken thing like me? His eyes pleaded with me, a silent prayer. Taking a leap of faith into a chasm of unknowns, I closed my eyes and placed my hand on the book, next to his. The moment my skin touched the cover, it happened. It was not a sound. It was not a light. It was a feeling, a sensation that ripped through me, soul deep. A jolt of pure, white-hot energy shot up my arm, arcing between his hand and mine. The book beneath our palms began to glow, a soft, ethereal silver light that pulsed with a slow, steady heartbeat. The veins of silver and gold in the map on the floor ignited, tracing the continents in lines of fire. A sound filled the chamber, but it was not a sound for the ears. It was a song in my mind, a chorus of 1,000 ancient voices, a wave of history and power and belonging. It filled the silent, hollow space inside me, not with a wolf's howl, but with the roar of the mountain itself. The spark I had felt earlier erupted into a bonfire, a searing, cleansing flame that burned away a decade of cold and shame. I gasped, my eyes flying open. Malric was staring at our hands, at the glowing book, his face a mask of utter, profound shock and wonder. The grimoire was opening. The leather straps that had held it sealed for a century were uncoiling like waking serpents, and the petrified wood cover was slowly, majestically lifting. The light and the song intensified, pouring from the opening pages of the book. It swirled around us, a vortex of silver energy and echoing whispers. Malric looked at me, his steel eyes now glowing with the same silver light. In their depths, I saw not a king, not a warrior, but a man who had just found the missing half of his soul. "Erindis," he breathed, his voice filled with an awe so complete it was a prayer. And for the first time in 10 years, a sound escaped my lips. It was not a word. It was a choked, broken sob of pure, overwhelming release. The cage around my voice, forged of trauma and shame, had cracked. As the light from the book enveloped us completely, one clear, dominant whisper rose from the chorus of ancient voices, a prophecy delivered directly into our minds. It was a warning and a promise, a destiny written in starlight and stone. When the silent soul sings and the granite king kneels, the mountain will bleed to heal the wound of the sky. But the price of the dawn is the shadow's embrace, for the queen of nothing must first consume all. The prophecy washed over me, a tidal wave of incomprehensible words and earth-shattering power. The queen of nothing must first consume all, the silver light, the chorus of voices. The raw energy pouring from the grimoire, it was too much. The fragile tethers holding my consciousness in place snapped. My knees buckled, and the world dissolved into a swirling vortex of silver and shadow. The last thing I felt was Malric's arms catching me, his strength a solid anchor as I fell into the abyss. I drifted in a sea of warmth and silence, a place without shame or fear. For the first time in a decade, the hollow space inside me was not empty. It was filled with a low, resonant hum, the echo of the mountain song. It was a feeling of being complete, whole. A part of me I thought was dead, or had never existed at all, had been woken. My wolf wasn't a separate entity, a beast in my blood. It was this connection to the stone, to the ancient power that slumbered beneath the fortress. When I finally surfaced, it was to the gentle crackling of a fire and the weight of a heavy fur blanket over me. I was back in my chambers, laid carefully in the massive bed. The room was dark, save for the firelight, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and old parchment. And he was here. Opened my eyes. Malric was sitting in the chair by the fire, the ancient grimoire resting on a small table beside him. He was not reading it. He was simply watching me, his scarred face illuminated by the dancing flames. His expression a complex mixture of awe, fierce protectiveness, and a deep, soul-shaking reverence that I had done nothing to earn. The moment he saw my eyes were open, he was out of the chair and by my bedside in 2 silent strides. He knelt on the floor, bringing his face level with mine. The sheer power rolling off him was still immense, but it was softer now, wrapped around me like a protective cloak. "Erindis," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before he gently brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. His touch was electric, 1,000 times more potent than before. The connection that had flared to life between us in the chamber below was still there, a vibrant, thrumming chord that tied my soul to his. I stared at him, my mind struggling to catch up. The prophecy, the light, the sob that had broken from my throat. My hand flew to my lips, my throat. Could I speak? He seemed to understand. His steel eyes softened, filled with an impossible tenderness. "It is all right," he murmured. "Do not force it. The lock is broken, but the door has been closed for a long time. It will open when it is ready." His understanding was a balm on my raw nerves. I gave a small shaky nod. I wanted to ask him 1,000 questions. What did the prophecy mean? What am I? What happens now? But the pathways from my mind to my voice were still rusted shut, overgrown with the weeds of a decade of silence. As if he could hear my unspoken thoughts, he took my hand, his thumb stroking over my knuckles. "The grimoire. It showed me things. Glimpses. It confirmed what I felt the moment I saw you. You are not wolfless, Erindis. You never were." He paused, gathering his thoughts, his gaze distant as he looked into the fire. "Your bloodline is ancient, far older than mine. It predates the division of shifters into packs, into alphas and omegas. Your ancestors were not wolves in the way we understand it. They were guardians, empaths. They were bonded to the land itself, their souls tied to the mountains, the forests, the rivers. They didn't just command the pack. They were the pack. They were the territory." He turned his intense gaze back to me, but that power was feared. Other shifters, hungry for dominance, saw it as a threat. They sought to destroy it, to breed it out. Over generations, the bloodline thinned, the power faded, until it was all but forgotten, remembered only as a myth. A wolfless omega, a barren female. These became curses, signs of a broken lineage, but they were not. They were signs of a dormant one. Your spirit was not silent because it was weak. It was silent because it was waiting for its other half. It was waiting for a connection to an alpha bloodline strong enough and a territory powerful enough to awaken it. My mind spun. It was too much to take in. My entire life, my identity, had been built on the foundation of my brokenness. To be told that my greatest shame was, in fact, my greatest strength. It was like being told the sky was green. The prophecy, I formed the words with my hand, a clumsy, half-forgotten sign language I had used as a child. His expression grew grim. It is a warning. The mountain will bleed to heal the wound of the sky. I do not know what it means, but I know it speaks of a great sacrifice to come. And the last part, the Queen of Nothing must first consume all. His eyes burned into mine. You were the Queen of Nothing. You had no pack, no voice, no power. The prophecy says you must consume. I believe it means you must draw power, claim what is yours. Claim me, claim this mountain. Only then will you be strong enough to face whatever is coming. He fell silent, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. The fire crackled, a lonely sound in the face of such a world-altering revelation. This was no longer just about me and him. This was about the fate of his people, his land, and a destiny I was terrified to even contemplate. A sudden sharp knock on the door shattered the intimacy of the moment. Malric's head snapped up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Enter," he commanded. A guard opened the door, his face pale and grim. "Your Majesty, it is Lady Valeriana. She has invoked the right of challenge." Malric went utterly still. The warmth in the room evaporated, replaced by a deadly chill. "She what?" he whispered, the words dripping with disbelief and cold fury. "She has challenged the Omega for the station of Luna," the guard stammered, refusing to look at me. "She cites the ancient laws. She claims the girl is an unproven stray, a threat to the pack's stability. She demands a trial by combat. To the death." The blood drained from my face. Trial by combat. Valeriana, a trained alpha female, a warrior, against me, a mute, untrained barca, whatever I was. It wasn't a challenge. It was a public execution. Malric rose to his feet, his body radiating a murderous aura. "She would dare," he snarled. "After everything she saw in the throne room, she would dare defy me so openly." "The old laws are on her side, my king," the guard said, trembling. "Any member of the pack can challenge a newcomer for their position, especially a prospective Luna, who has not yet been formally claimed. It is her right. The elders have already convened. They have sanctioned it. It is to take place at dawn." Dawn? It was only a few hours away. Malric turned to me, his face a mask of granite, but his eyes were filled with a wild, desperate fear. For all his power, for all his authority, this was a challenge he could not stop. The ancient laws were absolute, binding even the king. To interfere would be to show weakness, to prove Valeriana's point that I could not stand on my own. "I will not let this happen," he growled, more to himself than to me. He began to pace the room, his mind racing, searching for a loophole, a way out, but I knew there wasn't one. I had seen the look in Valeriana's eyes. This was her final, desperate move. She knew she had lost him, so she sought to destroy the one who had taken her place. She would use the law, her strength, and the pack's prejudice against me to murder me in plain sight. I pushed myself up, my legs shaky. I walked over to him and placed a hand on his arm. He stopped pacing, looking down at me, his inner turmoil stark on his face. I shook my head, then I did something that surprised us both. I balled my hand into a fist and held it over my heart. It was a gesture of resolve, of acceptance. I would not let him break the law for me. I would not be the weakness that undid him. I would face her. "No," he said, his voice ragged. "Erindis, you don't understand. She will kill you." I met his gaze, and for the first time, I did not look away. I let him see the fear, but I also let him see the flicker of a fire that he himself had lit. The Queen of Nothing. I had been that my whole life. I knew how to survive with nothing. But now I was not nothing. I was connected to him, to this mountain. The humming in my soul was a quiet, steady thrum of power. It wasn't the explosive strength of an alpha, but it was there, an anchor, an echo. He saw the change in my eyes. He saw that I was not the same broken girl he had bought at the market. His expression shifted from fear to a grim, terrible resolve. If you must face her, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper, then you will not face her alone. He strode to the door and flung it open. Get me my brother, he commanded the guard. Tell Kaelin to meet me in the training ring, now. He turned back to me, his eyes blazing with a fierce, protective light. The laws say I cannot fight for you, but they do not say I cannot train you. He took my hand and pulled me from the room, down corridors and stairs to a part of the fortress I had not yet seen. We emerged into a vast open-air arena carved from the rock, lit by massive flaming braziers. The ground was packed earth, stained and scarred from centuries of combat. A man was waiting for us in the center of the ring. He had Malric's height and breadth of shoulder, but his hair was a lighter brown, and his face, while handsome, lacked the king's brutal scars and severe intensity. His eyes, a warm hazel, were filled with concern. This was Kaelin, his brother, and the pack's weapons master. Brother, Kaelin said, his gaze flicking from Malric's grim face to my own. Is it true? Valeriana has invoked the right? It is, Malric bit out, and we have until dawn. He pushed me gently forward. Erindis will fight. You and I are going to show her how. Kaelin looked at me, at my slender frame and untrained stance, and a deep pity filled his eyes. Malric, this is impossible. Valeriana is one of our finest warriors. The girl has never held a blade. She does not need a blade, Malric said, his voice vibrating with a strange, fierce certainty. Her power is not in her hands. He stepped towards me, placing his hands on my shoulders, forcing me to meet his gaze. Erindis, listen to me. Forget everything you think you are. Forget the Omega. Forget the silence. You are the heart of this mountain. Feel it. Breathe it in. He closed his eyes. When Kael challenged you, the mountain responded to my rage. Now it must respond to you. Reach out. Not with your mind, with your soul. Feel the stone beneath your feet. Feel the echo, the hum we woke in the chamber. It is a part of you. Command it. I closed my eyes, terrified and overwhelmed. Command the mountain? It was absurd, but I could feel his belief, his absolute conviction pouring into me through our bond. I took a deep breath, and instead of air, I tried to breathe in the stone, the cold, the deep ancient silence of this place. At first there was nothing, just the biting wind and the fear coiling in my gut. But then I felt it. The low, resonant hum. It was stronger now, a steady vibration that ran up from the soles of my feet, through my bones, and settled deep in my chest. Good, Malric whispered, his voice a breath against my ear. Now hold that feeling. Valeriana will come at you with rage and steel. She will expect you to cower. She will expect you to break. You will not. You will stand your ground. You will be the stone. You will be the mountain. He stepped back. Kaelin, attack her. Kaelin looked at his brother as if he'd gone mad. Malric, I will not do it, Malric commanded, his voice iron. Do not hold back. Show her what she will face. With a pained, reluctant expression, Kaelin drew a blunted training sword. He approached me slowly. Forgive me, he murmured. He lunged, the movement a controlled but powerful blur, aiming the flat of the blade at my shoulder. Panic seized me. My instinct screamed at me to run, to dodge, to shield myself. But Malric's voice echoed in my mind. Be the stone. I held my ground. I closed my eyes and focused everything I had on the hum, the connection to the earth. I didn't try to stop the attack. Instead, I poured all my fear, all my desperation, into that bond, into a single, silent, soul-deep plea for help. The moment before the sword would have hit me, a tremor shook the arena. A slab of rock, no bigger than my hand, detached from the high wall and clattered to the ground a few feet away. It was enough. Kaelin was startled, his attack faltering for a split second. It gave me just enough time to sidestep, the blade whistling through the air where I had been standing. I opened my eyes, panting. Kaelin was staring at the fallen rock, then at me, his mouth agape. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Malric's face. Again, he commanded. Harder. And so my training began. For hours under the ghost moon, Kaylin attacked, and I learned not to fight back, but to connect. I didn't dodge, I stood my ground, rooting myself to the mountain, and with every attack, my connection grew stronger. Small things at first, a sudden gust of wind that threw off his balance, a trickle of dust from the ceiling that made him blink, a shift in the packed earth beneath his feet that made him stumble. They were not my actions, but the mountains, responding to my silent, desperate pleas. It was exhausting, a drain on my soul I had never imagined. But with every success, the hum inside me grew louder, more confident. The Queen of Nothing was learning to consume. She was drinking in the power of the mountain, making it her own. As the first pale fingers of dawn bruised the eastern sky, Kaylin stood back, breathing heavily, his face a mixture of disbelief and awe. I was still standing, untouched. Malric came to me, his eyes blazing with a fierce pride. He placed a hand on my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin. "You are ready," he whispered. "Let her come. Let her break herself against you." The horns sounded from the battlements above, a deep, mournful cry announcing the start of the rite of challenge. It was time. Valeriana was coming for me, and for the first time in my life, I was not going to run.